On previous days, Sayadaw has been explaining that one should dispel not knowing by being mindful. By being mindful, one should dispel not knowing on things that should be discerned. And Sayadaw has been explaining what are the things that should be discerned. And Sayadaw used the example which is very obvious, the example of hearing. In the hearing, there are rupa, materiality, and nama, mentality, arising in the hearing. And Sayadaw explained by using everyday language so that the yogis will understand. And Sayadaw explains that in the hearing, there are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering, and nama, mentality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering, arising in the hearing. And in previous days, Sayadaw explained that in the hearing, there is the receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element. The ear sensitivity is the receptor element. The sound waves are the striker element. Hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling are the ignition element. In the hearing, the ear sensitivity, which is the receptor, the sound waves, which are the striker, they are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. The ignition element, hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling, are nama, mentality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. So these nama and rupa, mentality and materiality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering, should be discerned by noting, hearing. There are only two things that the yogis should discern: rupa, mentality, and rupa, materiality, and nama, mentality, that should be discerned. In order to discern, one should be mindful at the moment hearing takes place, and one should be noting it as hearing. So in the hearing, the ear sensitivity and the sound waves are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha satya. Hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling are mentality, which are dukkha satya. So these two, materiality and mentality, which are dukkha satya, they should be noted just as hearing. At the moment of hearing, one should aim one's noting mind onto the hearing, and one should exert effort so that the noting mind will reach the object, hearing, and one should be noting it just as hearing. One should use the general usage, hearing, when noting hearing. One should not be analyzing whether this is rupa, materiality, this is nama, mentality. One should not be analyzing theoretically, but one should just label it in general terms, just as hearing. By noting thus, when viriya, sati and samadhi, when effort, mindfulness and concentration become strong, one will automatically come to discern the nama rupa distinctly when viriya, sati and samadhi become strong. When noting, hearing, when viriya, sati and samadhi are strong, at times yogi discerns the ear, which is rupa, materiality, which is dukkha, satya. When discerning the ear sensitivity, yogi will discern as it is where the hearing is taking place. So in this way, when the yogi discerns as where the hearing is taking place, yogi is discerning the ear sensitivity. And at times, yogi may discern as it is where the hearing consciousness and the sound waves are coming into contact. So the place where the hearing consciousness and the sound waves are coming into contact is the ear sensitivity, and yogi discerns the ear sensitivity. At times, the yogi discerns the ear sensitivity as the place where the sound waves strike. The sound waves strike on the ear sensitivity, and the yogi discerns the place where the sound waves strike, and thus yogi is discerning the ear sensitivity. And at times, yogi discerns as it is the instrument where the sound waves and the hearing consciousness are coming into contact. So in this way, yogi is discerning the function of ear sensitivity where the sound waves and the hearing consciousness are connected. So in this way, yogi discerns the ear sensitivity. Based on the ear sensitivity, hearing consciousness takes place. And by noting hearing, yogi discerns the ear sensitivity, which is rupa, materiality, which is dukkha, satya, the truth of suffering. And when noting hearing, when viriya, sati and samadhi, when efforts, mindfulness and concentration are strengthened, at times yogi discerns the sound waves as the things that are striking the ear base. So the things that are striking the ear base are the sound waves. So when the yogi discerns the things that are striking the ear base, then yogi discerns the sound waves. At times, yogi discerns as things that are being heard. So in this way, the sound waves are experienced by the yogi as things that are being heard. And at times, yogi discerns as the field where the hearing consciousness is taking place, because the sound waves are the field of hearing consciousness. In this way, yogi discerns the sound waves as the field of hearing consciousness. In this way, yogi discerns the sound waves which are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha, satya, the truth of suffering. Hearing arises based on the ear sensitivity. So if the person does not have ears, the person will not hear. Even if the person has ears, but if his or her ear sensitivity is not as strong, then the person will not hear well. So the ear is where the sound waves are striking. It is the place where the sound waves come. And the example is given here. When the cows go into the pasture, they graze in the pasture. So in the same way, the sound waves are the field where the hearing consciousness cognizes. So the sound waves are the field of hearing consciousness. By noting hearing, at times yogi discerns the ignition element, the hearing consciousness. So yogi discerns as it is just mere hearing. So in this way, yogi discerns the hearing consciousness. At times, by noting hearing, yogi discerns the contact, which is phassa. Contact is the phassa where the sound waves and the hearing consciousness are coming into contact. So when the yogi discerns the contact between the sound waves and the hearing consciousness, yogi is discerning phassa, the contact, which is ignition element, which is nama, mentality, which is also dukkha, satya. And at times, yogi discerns the feeling, pleasant or unpleasant feeling of the hearing. When the yogi discerns the pleasant or unpleasant feeling of the hearing, yogi is experiencing Vedana, hearing feeling, which is nama, mentality. So in this way, by noting hearing, yogi discerns either one of the rupa materialities, being the ear base and the sound wave, or the yogi discerns either one of the three mentalities, hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling. So in this way, by noting hearing, there are two materialities that can be discerned, three kinds of mentalities that can be discerned, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. So in order to discern these nama rupa, yogi should be mindful at the moment of hearing, noting it as hearing. In the seeing as well, the nama rupa, mentality and materiality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering, are arising. And when seeing is also analyzed, there are three elements, the receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element. The eye sensitivity is where the images are received in the eyes. So in the eyes, there is the sensitivity, materiality that can accept the images. So the example is given here in the mirror as well. In the mirror, the images are received and the image can be seen in the mirror. So in the same way, in the eyes as well, there is the sensitivity, materiality, where the images are accepted. And the eye sensitivity should be good so as to be able to receive the images, the colors, and so on. In the seeing, the eye sensitivity and the images, the visible objects, these two are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha sattva, the truth of suffering. In the eye sensitivity, the seeing consciousness and the visible object come into contact, and there will be seeing consciousness. The contact between the seeing consciousness and the visible object is called phassa. If the person sees pleasant objects, there will be pleasant feeling. If the person sees undesirable objects, then the person will have unpleasant feeling. And if the things that are being seen are medium, neither good nor bad, there will be neutral feeling. So in this way, when visible objects strike the eye sensitivity, there will be ignition element, seeing consciousness, seeing contact, and seeing feeling. So based on the rupa, materiality, being the eye sensitivity and the visible object, the ignition element, seeing consciousness, seeing contact, and seeing feeling arise. So in the seeing, there are rupa, materiality, which are dukkha sattva, the truth of suffering. And there are nama, mentality, being the ignition element. And they are also dukkha sattva, the truth of suffering. These are to be discerned with the seeing. In order to discern them, one should note with the general usage, just as seeing. By noting seeing, when viriya, sati, and samadhi, when effort, mindfulness, and concentration are strengthened, when samadhi, concentration, fall onto the rupa, materiality, yogi will discern the materiality. And when the samadhi, concentration, fall onto mentality, yogi will discern mentality. So in this way, by noting seeing, yogi will discern the materiality or mentality according to where the concentration falls on.
နာတိတဲ့ခိုက်တာမှလည်းပဲယုတ်တုဝတိသနာတုဝတိသတရားကြီးသင်ရှားနေတတ်သောအနေနဲ့ပေါ့လေနာကရှိတဲ့အနတ်ထင်နေတော့အောင်နှာခေါင်းကြည့်နေတာပေါ့နှာခေါင်းသန့်အဲဒီမှာတက်ခါပေါ်လေအနတ်ဒီနာနဲ့အနတ်ဒါယုတ်တုဝတိသတရားနာပါနာကတော့ခန္ဓာအနတ်ကတော့အတိတ်ခါပေါ်တိတ်ခါပေါ်လာတဲ့အခါကျတော့နာတိတာဘုချိန်နဲ့အနတ်လေးရောက်လာလို့မှုရပေါ့ပုံနာလေးရောက်လာလို့ရှိရင်တော့ပုတ်တယ်ဟောတာပေါ့ဒါပေါ့နှာခေါင်းထဲမှာတွားပြီးတော့ဒီအနတ်နဲ့စုံစည်းပြီဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကောင်းလာတဲ့စုံစည်းကောင်းခံစားမှုရပေါ့အကောင်းနဲ့အနတ်နဲ့စုံစည်းလို့ရှိရင်ကောင်းမှုပုတ်တယ်ကြီးရပေါ့ခံစားမှုတွေပြတ်တော့အဲဒီခိတ်တာပါလေခန္ဓာတိုက်တာအဖွင့်တတ်ဒါတွေသင်ရှားနေပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါကြီးပေါင်းစပ်ပြီးတော့ဖြစ်တဲ့ဟာကိုပဲဒီအသုံးကြီးကနေနန္တယ်လို့ခေါ်တာပါပဲအဲ့တော့လည်းအဲဒီလိုပဲနန္တယ်လို့ရှိမှရတာပါပဲ
In the smelling as well, there are rupa and nama that are dukkha sattva. In the smelling, there is the nose sensitivity. The nose sensitivity should be good so as to be able to receive the smell. The nose sensitivity is the receptor element, and the smell is the striker element. When the smell strikes the nose sensitivity, there will be smelling consciousness. And if the smell is a fragrant smell, there will be pleasant feeling. If the smell is a rotten smell, there will be unpleasant feeling. So the nose is where the smell and the smelling consciousness come into contact. And there will be either good smelling feeling or bad smelling feeling based on whether the smell is fragrant or rotten. At the moment of smelling, one should note in the general term just as smelling. In the eating, also there are receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. In the eating, the receptor element is the tongue sensitivity. The tongue sensitivity should be good so as to be able to receive the, so as to be able to know the flavors, sweet, sour, spicy, pungent, salty, and bitter. So the flavors, these 6 flavors, come into contact at the tongue sensitivity. And when the food is taken on the tongue, where the food, supple food is taken on the tongue, then the person knows the taste, the flavor of the food as sweet, sour, spicy, pungent, salty, or bitter. And there are food that should be chewed. By chewing the food, the person gets the flavor of the food. So the flavor, the taste or the flavor come into contact on the tongue sensitivity. So on the tongue sensitivity, there is the contact between the tasting consciousness and the flavor. It is called phassa. So in this way, the tongue sensitivity is the receptor element. The flavors are the striker element. Tasting consciousness, tasting contact, and tasting feeling are the ignition element. So when tasting good flavor, there will be good feeling. It is Vedana. And when the person gets unpleasant flavor, there will be unpleasant feeling. For someone who does not like bitter flavor, there will be unpleasant feeling if the person has to take bitter food. And for those who do not like spicy flavor, if they have to take spicy flavor, there will be unpleasant feeling. At the moment of tasting, there are the elements, the receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. And in order to discern them, one should be noting it as tasting. In the touching, the nama rupa, mentality and materiality are arising. In the body, in the part of the body where there is moisture, there is the body sensitivity. The body sensitivity that can recognize whether it is hot or cold. So if the person wants to test whether an object is either hard or soft, then the person can feel it with the part of the body where there is the body sensitivity. So in the body, there is the body sensitivity which can detect other objects that are hard, soft, stiff or tense, and so on. So in the body on the body sensitivity, the striker strikes the body sensitivity. There are 3 kinds of striker elements that can come into contact with the body sensitivity. So these 3 are Paṇḍitā Sayadaw, the earth element, Tejo Dhatu, the heat element, and Vāyu Dhatu, the wind element. The Paṇḍitā Sayadaw, the earth element, manifests as hardness, softness, roughness. And temperature element manifests as warmth, heat, cold. And Vāyu Dhatu, the wind element, the air element, manifests as stiffness, tension, movement. So these 3 elements could be touched. They are tangible. So these Paṇḍitā Sayadaw, Tejo Dhatu and Vāyu Dhatu are tangible and they strike the body sensitivity. When hardness comes into contact with the body sensitivity, one will experience hardness. And when softness comes into contact with the body sensitivity, one will discern the softness. And when heat, warmth, cold come into contact with the body sensitivity, the person will know it as hot, warm, cold. And when stiffness, tension come into contact with the body sensitivity, the person will know it as stiff and tense. So in this way, the receptor element is the body sensitivity. The striker elements are warmth, heat, cold, stiffness, tension, hardness, softness, and so on. So when the striker element strikes the receptor element, there will be ignition element, touching consciousness, touching contact, and touching feeling. When there is the touch with pleasant objects, there will be good touching feeling. When the body is touched by unpleasant objects, there will be bad touching feeling. And if the striker is neither good nor bad, there will be neutral touching feeling. So in this way, in the touching, the rupa, materiality, and the nama, mentality, are present. So in order to discern the receptor element, the striker element, and the ignition element, one should be noting at the moment of touching as hard. If it is hard, one should note it as hard. If it is soft, note it as soft. If it is warm, note it as warm. If it is cold, note it as cold. If it is hot, note it as hot. If it is tense, note it as tense. If it is stiff, note it as stiff. So by noting the such as warm, hard, cold, stiff, tense, and so on, one will discern the nama and rupa that are dukkha satya. In the touching, the field of touching is quite wide, and there are many things to be discerned. The yogis are asked to note whatever object that arises in the sixth sense door. But in the beginning of the practice, the beginner yogi may not be able to follow everything. So for these beginners, the object that is to be noted should be few and simple. For sitting meditation, the primary object is the rising and falling of the abdomen. Yogis have to focus their attention on the abdomen, and yogis should breathe normally. When breathing in, the abdomen rises, so yogis should focus on the rising of the abdomen, noting it as rising. When breathing out, the abdomen falls. Yogi has to focus on this falling of the abdomen, noted as falling. Rising and falling of the abdomen is caused by the air, and it is the rising falling manifests as stiffness, tension, movement. There are other nature involved in the rising falling, but what is more prominent is the stiffness, tension, and movement. By noting the rising falling of the abdomen, yogi can discern the rupa, materiality, and nama, mentality, which are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. So in the sitting meditation, breathing normally, focusing on the abdomen, noting the rising and falling of the abdomen, yogi can discern the nama rupa, which are dukkha satya. In the same way, when the yogi is doing other activities, such as bending, stretching, turning, lifting, moving, placing, even opening and closing of the eyes, blinking, everything should be done mindfully. So yogi should be mindful, even the minute activities such as blinking, opening, and closing of the eyes. So in these activities, the nama rupa are involved, and by being mindful of them, yogi can discern the nama rupa. Sayadaw gives an example of opening and closing the eyes as an example. When the eyes are kept open for some time, as the wind blows on the eyelids become dry. The dryness of the eyelids produces stiffness, tension, which causes unpleasant feeling. Due to the unpleasant feeling of the stiffness, tension on the eyelids, there is the intention to blink. And because of the intention to blink, the blinking of the eyes takes place. So this has to do with touching as well. And Sayadaw will continue to explain on the receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element from both theoretical and practical aspects tomorrow. This will be all for today. Sadhu, sadhu.